welcome back everybody. In this topic we're going to take a look at the ASA cut-through proxy functionality, which is pretty much the same as the iOS authentication proxy. Both Radius and TACACS protocols are supported, the same as iOS. You can do it also with local-based authentication. The same restriction applies as in iOS, meaning that the authorization functionality is not the way you want it to work, because basically you cannot apply a local access list as the authorization part on the process. So it's, as I said, it's similar to iOS authentication proxy, meaning that as the ASA receives traffic passing through it, so as it transits traffic from point A to point B, then based on the authentication configuration, based on the cut-through proxy configuration, then it will intercept the traffic and force it to authenticate, which was the same case as the iOS functionality. But the ASA also supports an additional functionality, which means that you can optionally telnet or HTTP to the ASA to trigger the cut-through proxy. So basically, it means that instead of sending traffic through the ASA, you can actually telnet or HTTP to the ASA to trigger the authentication proxy, which actually is the cut-through proxy, and that's called the virtual telnet or virtual HTTP functionality. So if we look at our diagram in here, what I want to do is I want to say that switch 1 is my client, and I have two options. Either switch 1 will initiate a session to R3, and let's say this is a telnet session, and based on the config of ASA3, ASA3 will basically intercept that session and force the user to authenticate. And I'll have the same configuration as I had on the iOS, meaning I'll have an inbound access list in here, which will basically drop all traffic. So this access will say drop or deny any. And again, once the user is authenticated and authorized through a remote Radius or TACACS server, then it will be allowed access based on the authorization received. Now, the second option would be that, for example, I can have the user, which is again switch 1, to actually telnet to the SA or HTTP to the SA on ASA's virtual telnet functionality or on ASA's virtual HTTP functionality, and authenticate, and then again receive the authorization from the remote Radius or TACACS server. We're going to take a look at the telnet implementation for both in both methods, both transit traffic to the ASA and also using the virtual telnet functionality. So first, what we want to do is we want to configure the ASA for Radius integration. Then we're going to identify the traffic which will trigger the cut-through proxy functionality. Then we'll apply the inbound ACL on gig 01, and then we'll actually simulate and see if it works or not, and what are the problems. So let's go on ASA3 in here, and let's say show run AAA. So first I want to enable AAA server, AAA group server, server group, and let's call it ACS Radius, and then say that the protocol is Radius, and let's say a server, and then ACS Radius, and let's say that is reachable over VLAN 17, host 172.16.100, and the key would be again Cisco. Then I want to, let's say, match, I want to create an access list, so access list authentication, which will basically match on all telnet traffic. So I want to say extended permit TCP any equal telnet. I want to apply this as part of the cut-through proxy functionality. So I want to say AAA authentication question mark, and I can say match. The access list name is called authentication, and as traffic comes inbound on VLAN 17, I want to authenticate that using the configured ACS server, which is called ACS Radius. I also want to create an access list, which is called, let's say, inbound, and say deny IP any. And now I'll apply this access list inbound on my VLAN 17 interface. Access group inbound in interface VLAN 17. If I hit question mark. Now, what I want to do in this case is for the authorization which would be received from the radius server, which was going to be the access list, for the authorization to be enforced by the SA, I need to specify this keyword, which is the per user override, which this functionality is not supported if you use, for example, a global ACL. So if I said access group, let's say inbound again, and I said global, and I hit question mark, I see that I do not have the per user override functionality available. So you need to use the inbound access list functionality for that to function. So now let's go to further on. So I'm going to use radius, which means that, as we're going to see, I'm going to have the same options as part of the authorization process, which again, I can do that using a DACL, a filter ID ACL, or a proxy ACL, so the same settings. And as I said, for the DACL to be applied, I need to enable the per user override functionality when applying the access list inbound on the interface. So now let's go on the SA to verify the config. So I'm going to say show run AAA server. So I've enabled the integration with the radius server. Then I'm going to say show run AAA. And I said that traffic matching this access list, if it's received inbound on VLAN 17, I want to trigger the cut-through proxy functionality using the ACS radius server. And let's see, show run access group. And I applied also the inbound interface on VLAN 17 with the per user override functionality. Let's say I can do this to test the integration with the ACS server. Let's first see, let's go on the ACS radius server and configure the ASA as a radius client. I have it configured from previous tasks, but it was enabled only for TACACS. So let's say radius and the password of Cisco. So Cisco, submit. So let's go back on network device and AA clients, make sure that the configuration was successfully applied. So radius is good, it was applied. I can actually test that I can authenticate using the test command. So I'm going to say test. I want to test the AA server, which was called end authentication. AA server was ACS radius. Let's go and verify that. So ACS radius. And I want to say that the username is Proxy, which is configured from the previous task, and the password was Cisco. 172.16.1.100. And I see that authentication is successful. So now what I want to do is I want to go on the ACS site configuration, and I want to verify that the authorization policy is correct. So now what I have is I say that if I authenticate with the authentication proxy user, then I will get applied the authentication proxy profile. So let's say cancel. Let's go to policy elements, and let's go on the authorization profiles, authentication proxy. Let's first try and use, again, let's say the DACL functionality, so not in use, and let's say DACL, static, and this one, and let's say submit. And now looking at the diagram, what I'm going to do again, I'm going to initiate a telnet session from switch 1 to R3, and that should trigger the cut-through proxy functionality. So let's go back on switch 1, I said. Let's first say show run telnet to see if telnet is allowed, which is not. So let's say conft, and let's say telnet from everywhere inbound on VLAN 17. Let's do a show name if in here. The telnet session will not function because I'm using a telnet on the lowest security level interface. So I want to say security level, for example, 20. and I want to go on switch 1, which was this. Let's say disconnect 1. And let's say telnet, I want to telnet to R3, which was, let's say, loopback of R3, 150.1.3.3. Connection refused. This is basically because I have the inbound ACL configured on the ASA, which basically restricts all traffic. So what I want to go is, let's say I want to go to R1, to ASA3 again. Let's say show access list. Because the applied access says a deny IP any. So let's say conf t, and I want to say access list inbound line 1 permit TCP any equal telnet. But although this is allowed based on the AA configuration, which is this, the telnet traffic should be intercepted for authentication. So let's go and let's verify again the access list, which is this one. So now the telnet session should be allowed. Let's go to switch 1 and initiate the session again. So I'm not sure at this moment if it triggered the cut through proxy functionality or not. Let's authenticate with the auth proxy and the password of Cisco. I get this error message, which basically confirms that I actually was authenticated by the ASA and not by the router, because basically the router has a line password authentication but has no password configured. So now if I go and look on ASA3 and I say show uauth, I see that switch 1 was authenticated, and basically it was authorized with this access list. If I say show access list, I see the content of the ACL, which says permit IP any. So this is the content of the ACL. So now again, if I telnet to R3, I should get successfully connected, but because R3 does not have a password configured, the session is not allowed. So let's go on ASA3 and say clear uauth, and let's say show uauth. What I can actually also do is I want to configure the virtual telnet functionality to be able to telnet on the ASA itself. So I'm going to say virtual telnet, and I'm going to telnet to an IP address in VLAN 17, which is, let's say, 136.1.17.99. So now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to switch 1, and instead of basically sending traffic through the ASA so that the ASA can intercept that based on the authentication configuration, I'm going to actually telnet to the ASA on the virtual telnet IP address, which again will trigger the same process. I should get again authenticated and authorized from the Radius server. So let's go on switch 1, and let's say telnet this time on 136.1.17.99. Let's say, so it works, authentication proxy, and then Cisco. It said authentication successful. So now again, if I go to ASA3 and I say show uauth, I see that I again got the same authorization, which basically means probably I have again full access to the network, which is the permit IP any functionality. So now it means that if I go to switch 1 and I telnet to R3, I should not be questioned for authentication. I should be connected to R3, which I am. We can also optionally look in the, if you want to, in the ACS logs to see, and I'm going to go through the ACS to the Radius authentication logs. So I'm going to AA protocol, and then the Radius authentication logs. And then I see here that I basically was authenticated with the username of our proxy, and the access was downloaded, which was this one. Basically what happens is the same thing as was the case for the iOS, meaning that the ASA will connect when the DACL functionality is used. the ASA will initiate an authentication request back to the ACS using the username of the DACL and the password of Cisco, basically saying, give me the content of the ACL. Only that the ASA supports this functionality natively, while on the iOS, to make it work, you need to enable the authorization network and the radius VSA send authentication command so that the DACL content is requested. Let's go on the ACS and let's see how the filter ID ACL works also on the ASA. So I'm going to go to authorization profiles, auth proxy, and I'm going to change the DACL authorization to the filter ID. So not in use, and I say filter ID ACL static and the value of auth proxy. So I'm going to say here auth proxy and submit. So this means I'm using the filter ID. This means I need to go on the ASA tree and configure that access list. So access list, auth proxy, permit IP any. Let's say show UAuth, and let's say clear UAuth. So this means I'm not authenticated. I'm going to go to switch 1, and again I'm going to say telnet to R3, auth proxy, Cisco. So connection was successful, meaning that authorization actually worked because I got connected to R3. If I go to ASA tree and I say show UAuth, I now see that the access list auth proxy was applied for this session. So if I say show access list auth proxy, I see that I have permit IP any and I have matches because I got connected to R3. Let's say clear UAuth and go on the ACS side and also see the proxy ACL functionality. So go to common tasks and go to, let's say, not in use and proxy ACL static, and we're going to say here again permit IP any. So permit IP any. I'm going to say submit, and now I'm going to go on the ASA, show UAuth, no authentication sessions, then go to switch 1, and again say telnet to R3, auth proxy, and Cisco. So I got connected. If I go to ASA tree and say show access list, and I say show UAuth, basically, this says that auth proxy was successfully authenticated, but I don't see the authorization process. So let's go on the ACS again. The reason that the session worked is because if I look at the show access list, I basically allowed the inbound telnet session to work, which is this. So now if I see a hit count of 6. If I go again on switch 1 and I say telnet again, and it works, I should see the hit count increasing and should be 7 now. It's actually 8, so it is. So I'm not matching the authorization received from the radius server, because if I do a show UAuth, I don't see the authorization being received from the radius server. So if I do again, I'll show UAuth, I see only that I got authenticated, but I don't see the authorization. So let's go on the ACS and see that the authorization is correctly configured. I'm going to go to my authorization profile and common tasks. The ACL syntax looks good. Let's go on ASA tree and say debug radius, clear UAuth, and then back on switch 1. Let's trigger the authentication again, which is this. Let's see if I receive the authorization from the radius server or not. On debug all. So I get the access accept message, and I get the authorization as the Cisco AV pair. The problem is that this format, so the Cisco AV pair, the format that I'm receiving the access list entry is not supported by the ASA. So what I need to do is I need to go on the ACS, and basically if I go on the common tasks, what I wrote in here, if I look at the radius attributes, it shows up as the Cisco AV pair in the format that I've seen on the debug from the ASA. But this is not supported by the ASA, it's supported only by the iOS. So I need to say not in use and go to the radius attributes and add a Cisco, radius Cisco, select. I want to use the AV pair. So let's select again. Let me first do a submit and then go back and edit the profile. So radius attributes, I say radius Cisco and then select. And then I want the attribute to contain AV. So I'm editing the Cisco AV pair attribute, but the format needs to be different for the ASA. It needs to be IP:INACL pound equal and permit IP any. So this is the format supported by the ASA. Let's say add and then submit. Let's go back on ASA 3 and they show UAuth. Let's say clear UAuth and then go back on switch 1 and trigger the process again. So auth proxy and Cisco, auth proxy and Cisco. Let's go back on ASA 3 and say show UAuth. And now I see the authorization properly received from the ACS. So now if I go on switch 1 and I do telnet on R3, it works because I get the error message from the R2 that I don't have a password configured online. And then if I go on ASA 10 and say show access list, I should see the ACL received from the radius server, which I do, which is this one. So now it works. The problem initially was, as I said, that the default format used by the ACS, which uses the Cisco AV pair with the string value of proxy ACL pound, is not supported by the ASA. It's only by the iOS. So in case you use the ASA, you need to still use the Cisco AV pair, but the value of the Cisco AV pair needs to be in the different format, which was IP:INACL pound and then the ACL entry.